we're joined by a man who's been all over and all across, veteran CNN correspondent, broadcaster, writer, renowned journalist, Brent Sadler, former chairman of N1 Editorial Board. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadler, for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Glad to be here.
So you've been here, there, and everywhere, truly. What did you see that made you raise concern when you chaired N1's editorial board in its early years?
Well, media, as we all know, Ellie, has always been about more than just reporting the facts. Today, it's an instrument of influence, leverage, sometimes I would say even intimidation. States, corporations, and oligarchs have understood this for years. The difference now is that technology and social platforms have made it faster than ever before, dirtier and more global. So what you're seeing now is a television station I was one of the co-founders of, N1, which is a CNN affiliate in the Balkans, reaches over 20 million people. One of the most, if not the most, so-called independent media in the region is now embroiled in a battle for its own survival, and it's thrust into the middle of a dispute that's been weaponized by all sides. And as you mentioned, you have the Russians involved in it, you have a disputed corporate private equity battle, and in the center of this is the battle for what people here think is free media, which from my experience from inside the boardroom and the editorial board has been much more than that. It has been owner influence in my records for the first almost half decade that I was involved in it. I left more than 5 years ago, and what I've seen on air has been an acceleration of media being weaponized in a climate where independent media in Serbia is under extreme conditions of state capture. So it has all the ingredients of geopolitical influences impacting in a small area compared to the rest of the world, but nonetheless toxic and aggressive.
So Mr. Sadler, you know, some of our viewers will say, you know what, if you own it, it's yours, if you own a business, but not in journalism. It doesn't work that way. How unusual is that for media owners to sit in on editorial boards? What is the risk to journalistic independence here?
Well, editorial boards are there to set the standards of transparency, good governance. So I was less than happy, I can put it like that, with the chairman of the group sitting in editorial board meetings and laying down conditions and governance issues with journalists. There should be a separation of powers. And there wasn't, and then there was later on, after I made a lot of fuss about it. And that led to a benchmarking report that was compiled by an independent journalist from the BBC. And in the end, that independent report that was promised to the stakeholders was buried itself. So that was at a time when I decided to leave that organization. And CNN, I should say, all its affiliates worldwide, and there are over 200 of them, none of those affiliates are actually subject to CNN's editorial guidelines. They are independent entities on their own right. So they each have their own editorial sway on how they cover stories, how they cover the news. But as you rightly say, owners can do what they want. But journalists, their credibility depends on them standing alone and not being subjected to the forces of either government state capture or attempts at state capture and what goes on in the boardrooms on the commercial side or the political.
Mr. Sadler, the plot thickens further because in this one story in the Balkans, and you will explain shortly why it matters beyond the Balkans, and there's money, big money, Gazprom Bank, right? So how it is all related, tie it all together for us.
Well, the fundamentals of this is that a media organization, and there are some fine journalists within it, are, in my view, generally unwittingly at the journalistic level. At the top level, it's different altogether. I was at that top level, so I do have inside knowledge. You know, believe that they are fighting for free media, but there's another side of the coin. The way the news is being covered, in my view, in my opinion, is aimed at bolstering the chances of the owner who was ousted, but still retains influence and is running through N1 a rebellious reaction and United Media against the overall majority shareholder. And that battle is going to end up in court in the Netherlands. It's also going to end up in court in the UK. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here, billions of dollars when it comes to value and debt leverage. So these are very big stakes. But it's more than just simply journalists doing their job. It's when journalists, in my view, are contracted to serve the interests without really knowing all the details of a wider play, which is involved in commerce, politics, and leverage.
And orchestrated from Moscow, in our instance, but not just. Bluntly put, why should audiences in Brussels, in Washington, or Jerusalem be paying attention to this specific example?
Well, the allegations of Russian involvement have been many, and there is nothing verified. They are connections, connecting the dots. I have to stress that. But when you have Russian involvement, pre-22 that was, involved in a company, then obviously in this weaponized atmosphere, those that would be fighting against them would be using that Russian connection as a point to score points. In fact, both sides are using the shadow of Russia to try to drive home their point of view. Why should it matter beyond this relatively small pool in southeastern Europe? Because it affects, in my view, right across the spectrum of the global landscape media, where business, look at Donald Trump's family business activities, look at Israel and what's happening there. And I did live in Israel and cover many stories out of there for many years. And journalism has to have access. Journalism has to have accountability. For those it wants to hold to power, it must hold to power, but it has to have accountability itself. And there lies the heart of the problem, I think.
So before we thank you for your time, Mr. Sadler, you've reported, as you mentioned, from conflict zones around the world, really. Where does this rank in terms of threats to free and independent journalism?
Look, there has been threats to life and limb of journalists who would be in the independent camp. But I would take issue with what independent really means today. I think that citizens are caught in the middle of all this, whether they're Serbian, whether they're Israelis, whether they're Americans. They're bewildered, they're distrustful. They're also very angry. And citizens are left to navigate a fractured information landscape where truth is contested and trust erodes by the day. So the result is a society, I would say, perched on fault lines, deep divisions, rising risks, and a public sphere where Western democratic values are just being eroded on a day-to-day basis.
That is being utilized by other forces. Mr. Brent Sadler, renowned journalist, thank you so very much for your time and for your insight on this important topic. Thank you, sir, very much for this.
Thanks,